What is the scariest thing you have ever experienced or witnessed? Got rip-roaring drunk and almost drowned in the tub. Pet bird who should have been in his cage and covered, I was too drunk and forgot, flew into the bathroom and sat on the sink and kept screaming. Had he not done that for about 15 minutes, I'd not be here. He flew in from the living room to the bathroom. That's a wild story. Getting that drunk is a real risk. It's crazy how the little things, like a pet bird, can end up being lifesavers. Sounds like you got lucky there. Sometimes animals really do have a sense of when things go wrong. Glad you made it through that. Just a reminder to be careful next time. I was 14 on a roller coaster at Universal Studios and almost fell out. Apparently the top thing that comes down wasn't locked. Fortunately, I was in the middle seat, with my 17-year-old brother on my left and a strong random man on my right. They saw my restraint start going up as the roller coaster did a nosedive. I was holding on to the bars on the seat behind me as both my brother and that stranger held the restraint down with their arms, so I didn't fall out. I'll still go on a roller coaster, but I always make damn sure I'm locked in now. That sounds intense. It's crazy how those moments stick with you. Being 14 and almost flying off a roller coaster would freak anyone out. It's cool that your brother and that stranger reacted quickly. Just goes to show how important it is to double-check everything. It's good you still ride coasters, though. Learning from experiences like that makes the rides a bit more thrilling, but also cautious. Was surfing with friends in Nicaragua when one of them had a seizure and basically died Baywatch style, saw him floating in the water upside down. Me and my other buddy were able to swim him to shore, but he was out cold, we thought he was dead for sure. A local performed something similar to CPR, but like mixed with some voodoo magic and was able to revive my friend. Anyways, it was very scary believing my buddy had just drowned in front of me. That sounds intense. Seeing a friend like that is something you never forget. It's good you and your other buddy acted fast. The way that local helped must have felt surreal, like something out of a movie. It's wild how life can change in an instant. I'm glad to hear your friend pulled through. Moments like that really put things in perspective. Makes you appreciate life a bit more. The scariest thing that I witnessed would be watching my dad accidentally slip down the stairs in our house. I was probably 10 or 11, and it was late at night. A neighbor had to come over and watch my brother and I until my parents got back from the hospital the next day. That sounds intense. I remember a time when my friend fell down the stairs at a party. It was sudden, and everyone went quiet for a moment. Thankfully, he just had a bruise. Moments like that really make you realize how quickly things can change. It's a weird mix of shock and concern. It's good to laugh about it now, but it wasn't funny then. Glad your dad was okay too. I was swimming with my niece and nephew in the wave pool. I half noticed two boys, 10, and one girl, 5, swim to the deep end. A few moments later the wave started and the boys quickly swam to the shallow end. Not really paying attention, I hear a tiny voice ask for help. Between huge waves, I see the little girl start climbing the ladder and next wave knocks her into the water again. I looked at the lifeguards and they were talking to each other, not watching the water. Another wave comes and she's under the water. Keep in mind I'm a good swimmer and she is in the deep end that is too overwhelming for me to swim in. So I swim over to check on her and grab her elbow and lift her up. Then ask her if she is okay. She says between gasping for air that she has asthma. I ask if she wants to go back to the shallow end. Exhausted and out of breath, she just nods her head yes. I pulled her back to knee-deep water and ask her to point out her parents. She does, and I ask if she is okay. Now she says she is. Not so scary for me, but probably terrifying for her. That sounds intense. You were just hanging out and then suddenly you're in a situation where a little kid needs help. It's wild how quickly things can change in a pool. Good thing you were there, and you managed to get her back to safety. Just shows that even in a fun setting, we should keep an eye on the little ones. Glad she was okay in the end. Stepped on the wrong spot on a sandbar along the Missouri River and instantly fell through the ground. My grandpa was there and acted quickly enough to grab my reaching hand before I was sucked completely under. I remember washing the sand out of my hair in the shower later. That sounds like a wild experience. It's pretty cool that your grandpa was there to help out. It must have been a bit scary, but it's nice you could wash it all away later. Those moments stick with you. I lived in a shitty apartment in Tampa, Florida while going to college. Suitcase City area. For those familiar, I woke up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning to see someone standing in front of my bed looking through my wallet. As soon as he saw me wake up, he ran out and I never saw him again. I was really mad at first and then scared afterwards. Realized he could have slit my throat in my sleep or whatever else, and I probably would have never known. That sounds really unsettling. Waking up to a stranger in your room is a nightmare. It's crazy how quickly fear can kick in after an incident like that. I guess it's one of those moments that makes you more aware of your surroundings. Living in a rough area has its challenges. Glad you weren't hurt, but it must have stuck with you for a while. Being kidnapped, only for a night day, but still. I haven't spoken about it with anyone before. It was 2 years ago. I've recently booked my first therapy appointment because I've realized it's messed up a bit. That sounds tough. Being taken like that, even for a short time, can really mess with your head. It's important you're seeking help now. Talking about it might be a good step toward processing what happened. I'm sure the therapy will help you work through those feelings. It's never too late to start that journey. Scariest thing I experienced was having a blood clot in my brain when I was a teenager. For about 4 years, they couldn't diagnose me and I was getting worse, severe headaches, episodes where I threw up for days, and many more including unsynchronized optic nerves, so I had to wear an eye patch to see straight. That sounds really intense. Dealing with a blood clot and not knowing what was wrong must have been pretty scary. The constant headaches and other symptoms sound tough to handle, especially for that long. Wearing an eye patch just to see straight adds another layer to it. Glad you made it through that. It's a lot to go through at such a young age. Hope it's all behind you now. I don't know, I live an exciting life. I biffed a backflip and scorpioned myself on a trampoline as a teenager, spent what felt like forever, home alone on a trampoline not being able to move below the neck. That was pretty terrifying, but it got better. Another time I was skinny dip cliff jumping on a camping trip. One jump I slapped my bag on the water on the way in, emptied my lungs, curled into a ball and started sinking like a rock. I don't float with full lungs and it is real hard to swim after sacking yourself. I was clawing my way through a fading sepia tunnel by the time I broke the surface. Definitely thought I was going to drown there. I've had 2 backpacking trips where I watched the same friend slide down a mountain after the earth crumbled away under his feet, and a third where a duffel bag-sized boulder came careening down a mountain and missed my other buddy's head by about 6 inches before smashing a tree into toothpicks. Those were all terrifyingly close calls. Or maybe the time I did a semi-controlled slide for 2 kilometers down a hill driving home in a winter storm. That was pretty sphincter tightening. I could keep going. Suffice to say, you will never feel more alive than when you think you're about to die. Sounds like you've had some real close calls. That trampoline incident must have felt like forever. The cliff jump was risky too. I can't imagine how panicked you must have been sinking like that. Watching your friends have their own mishaps adds to the chaos. That winter slide sounds intense, too. It's odd how those moments really make you feel alive, even if they scare you half to death. So there was this one time I was working at a Stewart's gas station in the Adirondacks. I saw an older guy walk up to my register. I went over, said hi and scanned his items. Then I looked up to tell him the price and his eyes freaked me the hell out. They were almost all brown, but not normal brown. They were all brown and gold, very similar to a salamander or reptile. And as I looked at him, he just had this really uncanny valley feeling about him. He smiled at me and just said thanks, and I was so stunned by the vibe I got off the guy I had to go sit down for a bit. Like nothing about him was right. Immediately felt like I was in danger looking at him. That's an unsettling story. I can imagine how it felt. You're just doing your job, and then boom, you encounter someone who seems off. It's weird how some people just give off a strange vibe. You'd think it's all in your head, but sometimes instincts kick in. It's a relief that you were able to step away. Better to trust your gut than to ignore it. I was walking in downtown Boston one night while there for a trip with my wife. The couple in front of us had a younger-looking lady start walking next to them and whispering, and then she left just as a young guy appeared next to me and said something like, "How much are you buying?" I pieced it together pretty quick and just sort of laughed and told him that I think he wanted the couple right in front of us. His whole face changed in an instant, and I can't explain it, but all the light went out of his eyes as he kept pace, but just stared at me. Eventually, he walked away, but for a moment there you could just see him doing the logistics of whether to doing something or not. I've been in a lot of rough areas, with rough people, and dumb situations. I have never seen someone's eyes look dead like his did in that moment. That sounds pretty intense. I remember a time when I was in a sketchy part of town and got approached by someone asking for money. I just shrugged it off, but you could see the desperation in their eyes. It's strange how quickly a situation can shift. You think you're just walking around, and then you get a glimpse into someone else's world. Makes you realize how different experiences can be, even in the same place. Losing someone you love to dementia. I could cry every time I see what it does to my grandmother, but generally to anyone. I'm sorry for everyone who is also going through this or knows someone who is suffering from dementia. Remember that your family members do love you and still care for you. It's just dementia that unfortunately affects them. #RedHeart #. My grandmother is the most amazing person I know, and I love talking to her. I wish she could see me now and how far I've come, but all I can do is be happy that she's still doing as well as she is despite her dementia, and to just keep telling her about my achievements, in hopes of her understanding and realizing it. I love you, Grandma. #RedHeart. It's tough to see someone you care about fade away like that. Dementia really changes things, and it's hard not to feel helpless. I can relate, and I wish I could do more for my loved ones when they go through this. Still, holding on to the good memories and sharing your accomplishments with her seems meaningful. It's nice that you can be there for her, even if she doesn't fully grasp it. I was at a laundromat with my 10-month-old daughter. She was in a stroller parked next to me. A little boy was running wild, pushing a laundry cart, the basket kind with wheels and a pole that sticks up and has a bar to hang clothing on, when the cart bobbled and fell over. The pole came down, right to my baby's shoulder. A couple inches over, and it would have been her skull. It didn't end up touching her, but oh man! I was a wreck, and the man that worked at the place almost had a coronary. Kid's mom didn't do a g-damn thing. That sounds intense. It's scary how quickly things can happen, especially with kids around. I can imagine the guy working there was probably freaking out as well. It's wild to see how some parents react to situations too. Good to hear your daughter was okay, but I get why you felt so shaken. That must have been a moment you'll both remember. Pulled over to help a guy who just lost his tire after hitting a curb. He was outside of his truck, on the passenger side with the door open looking through his glove box for tow truck info while I was talking to him from the side of the road when a person going 55 miles per hour hit him and smashed into his vehicle. That sounds really intense. It's wild how quickly things can change. You think you're just helping someone out, and then out of nowhere, another car comes flying in. It's a reminder that you never know what could happen in just a moment. Glad you weren't involved in that crash. It must have been quite a shock to witness. If we're going by my personal safety, my wife's grandfather pointing a gun at me after a family argument. As far as scariest period, my second son's heartbeat dropping dangerously low during my wife's labor BC. He was squeezing his umbilical cord. Thank God he turned out fine. That sounds intense. Family arguments can really escalate sometimes. Having someone point a gun at you is no joke. And dealing with the stress of your son's heartbeat dropping during labor must have been nerve-wracking. Glad to hear everything turned out okay in the end. Those moments really put things into perspective about what matters. In my grandma village, one cow's leg struck in space between roots of trees. While trying to get it out of that place it struggles, eventually cow's legs cuts off due to struggle. Later when people found her, she standing in same place with legs still attached with some skin of her. Took her to vet and they amputated her leg, only half of it. I sometime changed her bandages of leg and bone of her still can be seen. She lived for years after that but can't freely herd like before. It's a pretty tough story. The cow had a bad time getting stuck like that. Losing a leg is a big deal, and it's kind of sad she couldn't move around like she used to. But it's nice to hear she lived for years afterward. It's amazing how animals adapt, even when things change drastically for them. Changing the bandages must have been a bit hard too, seeing the injury up close. My car was totaled last year when a distracted driver ran a red at 50 miles per hour. The impact sent my car around the corner 40 feet into oncoming traffic. I think I'm only here to talk about it BC. I always wait several seconds when the light turns green. The hit was between the driver door and front wheel, so I was about 6 inches from a full-on broadside. It knocked my car off the axle. I walked away with severe bruising from my knees knocking together and my elbow hitting the door. I didn't even see it coming. That's a tough experience. It sounds like you really dodged a bullet there. Waiting a few seconds at a green light might seem like a small thing, but it probably saved you from worse injuries. Glad to hear you walked away, even with the bruises. It's wild how quickly things can change on the road. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.